Like I find more commonly you will work with the vendor, there'll be a few remediations, you'll fix them, or they'll fix them, and then you'll kind of move through. But I don't know, it's always interesting when you're working with vendors because a lot of it can be vibes, right? They can promise you the world and you just have to go off it. And like I have talked a little bit in the past around like maybe you can pen test your like most risky potential vendors. So like you're not going to pen test your Googles, your Amazons. They probably do security pretty damn well. So like it's going to be a waste of time. However, for the smaller vendors that you're using in your stack that are extremely risky, it's probably only going to be 2 or 3. For those, you might want to spend a little bit more time on them and actually like, you know, the whole trust but verify. And it's the but verify thing we often forget. So something I always love is when GRC teams or sales teams, in some cases, interview customers, they tell us like what they care about. Like, is it SOC 2? Is it data residency? Is it specific country access? That kind of stuff. And let us see that like really early, because I love to function that stuff into my roadmap because it kind of gives me a like, oh, this is what might be coming next. So maybe I should prioritize that because I prefer to be ready than have to like pull my team off of different things and then get them to focus on compliance. So, you know, the less I have to do that, the better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GRC Engineer podcast. I have a very exciting guest with me today. It's probably one of the first guests that is probably not in GRC, is GRC adjacent. So probably one of the security teams that is the closest, I would say, to the GRC team. So I have with me Kane Narraway. Super exciting to have you with me today. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. We have a big time zone between us. So I'm in New Zealand, you're in the UK. So, you know, my day's just ending, yours is just beginning. So, you know,
Exactly.
Good way to start the week.
I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode. FedRAMP, Ref 5 or 20X, GovRAMP, or CMMC. There's a company on a mission to make them fun, and that company is called Paramify. If you're chasing your first authorization or stuck living in common hell, if you know, you know, Paramify makes it simple with the POA management and automated documentation tool. To get you started, they are offering my listeners a $750 gap assessment. Basically, they will show you where you're at right now and give you a clear roadmap or where you need to go next in one clean dashboard. Go to paramify.com/GRC to get access to their offer. That's paramify.com/GRC. And now, back with the episode. Exactly. Great way to start the week. So I'm like, 8 a.m. Let's go. Let's get started with a great conversation around the enterprise security. But yeah, I'm very excited. So to kind of, I think most people you're pretty well known in the industry, but to kind of go through your background. So you've been in security, I would say, over 10 years. You worked in the UK for the government, for BT, and then you worked for Atlassian in corporate security, and then you headed corporate security for quite some time, and then you moved to Canada, and then there you worked on platform engineer zero trust for Shopify, and then you moved again to New Zealand, where you had enterprise security at Canva. So you've been a kind of a globetrotter of some sorts as well. We worked in numerous different countries, kind of always in the enterprise security side. Anything else you want to add to your background?
I definitely think it's a bit of a, Goldilocks situation. Australia too hot, Canada too cold, New Zealand it's just like home. So, it's close enough for me.
Nice. You already went through quite a bit, so now you kind of, you can have an Excel spreadsheet and know which one is best for what. Should be a good travel guide. Perfect. So to get started, what I found fascinating is you worked for 3 pretty major tech companies. I would say like the 3 of them are pretty well known, pretty impactful in the industry, and their own niche. They're probably like kind of one of the biggest leaders in their own verticals. And throughout the years, you kind of worked on the enterprise security side for all of them. And of course, here on the GRC Engineer podcast, we're interested in kind of the interaction between your experience throughout the years and how your interactions with GRC changed and what they were asking from you as well, because often, unfortunately, it comes that way. So they're asking for stuff, and then you kind of have to provide that for them.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Like I find, like you say, enterprise security teams, we tend to work quite heavily with GRC teams. Tends to be that we're implementing a lot of the controls around access, user access reviews, endpoint security things. It's always been very collaborative, which I think is nice. There are things that we need for compliance, and there are things that we need for security, and sometimes these things are the same thing, sometimes they're not. But generally, like I think it's always interesting because we're all kind of building towards the same vision, at least.
Yeah, very, very, very cool. In terms of the kind of more specific relationship, would you say so? I know that before, I would say GRC teams were not kind of didn't have to follow kind of a mandate for speed and velocity. They were working with different timelines because audits are often yearly cycles, and as time went by, because compliance is getting more towards the realm of sales enablement, there's also this push for speed and getting faster time to compliance. And how, in your experience, has it changed the way you collaborate with them since, kind of now everyone needs to talk to, or, you know what I mean? It kind of changed from like just 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when I probably started, and like when I maybe first heard about things like SOC 2, maybe in like 2016, somewhere thereabouts, it was mostly bigger companies doing it, and they were all going through it. They were all working out what it meant, the problems, the different controls. And these days, I see startups with no product going through SOC 2, and so like it's changed so much because back then it just wasn't well known. And now it's almost like a strong requirement. It's table stakes. And so you cannot even sell enterprise products without it, which I think is a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways, But I think, like you're kind of talking about, I think it's the velocity. So it's people want SOC 2 especially, but generally all compliance just depends on customers and things. But they always want it as soon as, right? Because like you say, it's become a sales enablement piece, whereas before it was very much like hey, let's just do our best for security and improve. And yeah, it's changed a lot in those years.
Yeah. Would you say, from your perspective, so from your team's perspective, would you say that compliance being more of a sales enablement, is it helping you sometimes with like inner challenges? Sometimes, of course, enterprise security might have to win like ability to have specific things checking on the endpoint and stuff like that. And it has to work with the IT team, with engineering. It can be like, kind of putting forward your arguments, and compliance is often part of them. Would you say that now that compliance is almost becoming more strategic as like a bottom line related endeavor, would you say it also helps you on the enterprise security side with like some of those challenges you have to kind of win over as stakeholders?
Yeah, definitely. And I find that because a lot of people know this exists now, they sort of understand the requirements and that kind of thing. It means that you can kind of say, we're doing it for this reason. And people are immediately like, okay, yeah, I've been through this before in a lot of cases. If not, it doesn't usually take very long to explain to them why. Because you can kind of see, like, might be $1 million of sales that we're losing because we don't have this. And so it's a very easy thing to just point to the numbers. Whereas before, you kind of have to be like, yeah, we need to encrypt your disks because it's a security control. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just makes everything easier. And even though it's stuff you're going to do anyway, it just means that you don't have to spend months and months and months gathering data, building justifications, all of that stuff. You can just point to, yeah, we're doing it for compliance, but if you want more details, here's the project. You can go read. And no one ever
Yeah.
does. Everyone's okay with that.
It's like almost a heuristic. So it's like a mind map you can use and kind of push them back to it. And it's like, it's very easy to understand. Okay, this control, this is what we need, and this is what we're doing this. Yeah, I do see that. I think GRC teams could be better at making sure the other security teams can leverage that, because sometimes I think we can have that power, but sometimes because we're not in all those conversations, especially when the teams are not as tight, then in that case you might have to not leverage these arguments and use others, and at some point you might run out of things to kind of say if you don't use the might of compliance, which it can sometimes help as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, obviously depends what you're doing, and you need to kind of use the carrot and the stick. Like, you can't just be
100%.
like, we have to do this for compliance. Make it nice first, go through the process, but it does help. Like, there's always going to be stragglers who maybe don't want to do something, or vocal people being like, this is difficult, but I think it helps for that. So it's just getting the last ones across the line where I find it's really useful.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's very good to hear. I would say something else I wanted to ask you about related to this is, there's a split of responsibilities between enterprise security and compliance and GRC in general. And I do see one area that kind of, in my opinion, often bridge the two. And that area would be kind of third-party risk management. So, of course, the TPRM team often handles like the intake of vendors. So they'll go through the first process. Hopefully they don't send questionnaires. Maybe they do. It depends, right? It's kind of that necessary evil. We didn't find a better way so far for some reason. So they might do the intake, and then once they onboard the vendor, often the enterprise security team might do the ongoing management, especially as often you manage the kind of security side of the business applications, which means like potentially SaaS security. I saw in your kind of job title you had first party risk, but I know that it's kind of split. So it's more of like the after the intake. So in your experience, how do you see the relationship between the two? So like the almost the handover. So it starts on TPRM and then it kind of moves over to you for the ongoing. And do you think TPRM should be also involved in the ongoing, or do you think there's enough volume on the intake for them to just focus on that part?
This is one area where I'm not super strongly opinionated. So many years ago, even in the enterprise security team, I was the person sending out the painful questionnaires and responding to them. But I think the most common model I see is kind of, as you say, where GRC kind of evaluate the vendor as a whole, and then they kind of hand over to enterprise security who sort of build in controls like to make sure that we have SSO, to make sure that we have the tool set up correctly, and to make sure that we have logs from the tool and all that kind of stuff. Could our team do it? Absolutely. I find that kind of the shift over time has been that it probably used to be enterprise security teams doing it just because they worked with the IT team and they had the context. And I think over time, we're usually busy doing other stuff. I find that TPRM has sort of merged more into GRC and compliance, and we're doing it a lot for GDPR and things like that. So, I find that keeping up with the controls and new regulations and all that kind of stuff is like a job in its own right. So I think that over time, that's probably why that shift has moved. But yeah, I definitely think it's a case where it's kind of the same, kind of different. Like it's definitely for security and compliance, but most of what I tend to be looking for when we're doing this stuff in enterprise security is, like I said, like making sure that we're setting things up, we can respond, we're putting the right preventative controls in. And some vendors are bigger than others. So, if you're dealing with like a calendar tool or something, small, it's easy, hopefully to secure. It's probably, not going to take you too long. If you're trying to secure Salesforce, that might even be a team in its own right at some larger companies.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you definitely need a kind of risk-based approach in a sense, depending on like kind of the amount of data it touches, etc. In your experience, do you input into what the TPRM team should ask? Because sometimes is the main point where you can have a direct contact with the vendor is on the onboarding phase, and like when you're on the procurement cycle, and maybe you want to ask for like a data diagram or like specific architectural details, or maybe like some more like above and beyond questionnaire. Maybe you want a bit more detail on specific areas. Maybe it's not as common, but like, do you also add like some of your own stuff to be ensure it's added to whatever they ask? Or it's more like you might reach out later once you kind of work on the onboarding and you try to like plug it into the SSO, etc.
Yeah, usually reach out later. I don't want to occupy brain space, for these
Makes
things.
sense.
And it tends to be that we only need them in weird circumstances. So, like, at least here, we have a rapid risk assessment process similar to other companies that I think Firefox were probably the people who maybe developed it or made it
I like it
popular
a lot.
at
Yeah.
least. And so we tend to do a rapid risk assessment for those high risk vendors when they come in, and that's when we ask for maybe like design docs and diagrams and more interesting information.
That makes sense. So then in that case, it's more like you don't want to bloat the kind of procurement process, and once on board, you just want to make sure they pick the right one at this stage. Is did ever happen in your career overall where you from security concerns you might have to kind of say a no go to a vendor that wanted to be onboarding, or most of the time Like it's pretty standard, so it didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, there's always edge cases, and I think the more you look, the more edge cases you'll find. I think we've definitely had vendors that we've said no to. We've also had vendors that we've onboarded and then said no to later because like our requirements have raised beyond the initial review, for example. And so I think it's definitely like you are going to have a needle that moves over time. And so you obviously need to make sure that you're, re-reviewing some of those really old ones that come in. It's pretty rare. Like I find more commonly you will work with the vendor. There'll be a few remediations. You'll fix them, or they'll fix them, and then you'll kind of move through. But I don't know. It's always interesting when you're working with vendors because a lot of it can be vibes, right? They can promise you the world, and you just have to go off it. And like I have talked a little bit in the past around like maybe you can pen test your like most risky potential vendors. So like you're not going to pen test your Googles, your Amazons, because they probably do security pretty damn well. So like
Yep.
it's going to be a waste of time. However, for the smaller vendors that you're using in your stack that are extremely risky, it's probably only going to be two or three. For those, you might want to spend a little bit more time on them and actually like, the whole trust but verify. And it's the but verify thing we often forget.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because there's this thing where you can have those vendors that are fairly small but have a fairly large kind of web of interactions with your infrastructure and with your tech stack. And there's this kind of in between where they're actually super risky, but most likely the security is extremely immature versus huge vendors, which kind of have more touch points, but they have strong security most likely, and very small ones that have low touch points. So that makes sense. Like that in between is stuff. And I think especially now with AI vendors, I think it's becoming more and more common that they get crazy adoption without having a security team or without having anything plugged in yet. But they already they gain 100 million AR every 15 seconds or something.
You only need to look at even the big ones, right? Like the ones that weren't big maybe a couple years ago, like
Yep.
Anthropic and stuff. Like they were very small. I think anyone who reviewed them in the early days was a bit like, that's a bit risky. But over time, obviously, they've invested more and more in it, and they've done pretty well and sort of like raising the bar over time. So I think it's just can't always judge a book by its cover, I guess, but you can sort of where security isn't maybe the best, you can at least look for future growth and asking questions. Like I said, sometimes it is a bit of vibes, but you ideally want data, not vibes where you can.
Yeah, exactly. Vibes is nice, with the questionnaires, just yes to everything. It's you just use ChatGPT, fill it out, send it out. You just
And
want a
then
new
you can have
contract.
your chat GPT record the responses and say yes on the
Yeah,
other end.
very underrated. That was super interesting. So like we spoke a bit about kind of the intake, the vendor. Another part of GRC that has very strong, I would say, relationship with enterprise security is of course compliance. We spoke a little bit about it at the beginning. I want to dive a bit deeper on it. Security, like compliance security, there's always this debate. I don't really care about the debate too much. I would just say like compliance is useful for external stakeholders, and it's also you have a review similar to a pen test in a sense from a third party assurance, but the review is based on the controls. So depending on how the controls you think are relevant from a security posture will be how much you care about what the certificate or the report provides. But from an enterprise security side, I do see that often all frameworks have a lot of controls around endpoints, around networking as well. Some of them a bit dated, but they do have lots of controls that you probably will have to help in implementing and monitoring as well. From your perspective, like what kind of practice you see that allow the relationship between the two teams to be the best? So like almost if if you can reflect back, what were the things when it went very well? What were the things that were consistent in like relationships and kind of sharing of data? And when it didn't went too well, what were kind of what was breaking down? What made the relationship a bit more difficult?
Yeah. I think like the biggest piece of advice I have is that it's become like a trend recently, especially with tools like Vanta and Drata and so on, that you kind of connect it up. You want to do it as quick as possible. So you put the minimum amount of controls in and then you worry about the rest later. That's fine if speed is the key, that's okay, right? You can always add things later on. I think it is worth asking your enterprise security team, if you have one at that point, on like what are the controls they want to implement, and is there any way that you can kind of work together on this? Because like the way I like to think about it is there's some stuff I will implement for compliance. Maybe I don't care an awful lot about it. I'm just like, I'll do it. It's okay. We need to do it. Sure. But there's probably a few things I want to implement for security that maybe aren't in our controls. That's why like frameworks like SOC 2, where it's a little bit of choose your own adventure and you can add in your own, because I like this as a chance to act as a bit of a forcing function to get a few of those things across the line. So like an example I use quite often is, especially in endpoint land, it's easy to understand. Like it's harder for you to secure Windows, Linux, and Mac all at the same time. Like you're going to need probably 3 MDMs or one that kind of does an okay job at all of them, but doesn't really excel. You're going to need an EDR that works on all of them. And so if you're a company where you've got 1,000 MacBooks and you've got 3 Windows users, realistically, like when you look at breaches in real life, it's probably going to be stuff affecting Windows. Like that's where most malware is, right? And so if you can go, these Windows users, maybe we can look at, moving them to Mac if possible, moving them to a cloud workstation or something that we can like really lock down and not have it like this device that's very open with admin privileges. Then you're going to do like massive benefits, not only for security, but also your velocity in the future. Because now you're not going to have to implement encryption on 3 platforms. It's just one tick of a button instead of 3. But as you start getting all those edge cases, that complexity is really going to help you, because otherwise you'll just be bogged down making changes. I can speak from experience. If you support all the platforms, it's very difficult. And it's exactly the same in cloud world with multi-cloud. So I think probably the best piece of advice I have is working together, kind of see it as a Venn diagram, mostly overlaps, but there's a few things in each realm where you're like, oh, maybe we can bring this a bit closer together.
Yeah, I like it. I think I like what you said about SOC 2 as well, in terms of like more, you kind of can chart your own path and so like you kind of design your own controls and which you get assessed against later, because that's potentially a way to embed more of what you care about versus just what the framework cares about, and then making sure it's also added. So you the Venn diagram is more and more a complete overlap. And then designing controls. So of course, as companies grow, like they need a common controls framework because they have to map to several standards all at once. And when I think about common controls framework, I like to think about it as a way for us to enforce our own baseline we care about. And for each kind of area, so for enterprise security and application security, making sure like they're full part of like the design of those controls, because then they'll have to implement it and monitor them, etc. I really like the way they think about it. And when you said about like kind of speed and like kind of tools that help you with speed, but then might not think about scale for the longer term and like more like things that rise with complexity, I would say like what's challenging is companies that already were there before kind of the automation platforms, they use spreadsheets or whatever, or Jira tickets or other things. And companies that started with these tools, that's where it's difficult, because when you start with these tools, like you started for one purpose, which is like quick to sell. And then when security becomes the key kind of factor for your team versus just like selling, because once you got it, then you just have to maintain it. Then when the other teams get staffed, so we have now an AppSec engineer and an enterprise security person, then those people that care more about security, and then the core purpose of your kind of existence was just compliance. And then when you have to have a risk-based program and think about the top risk and all this, that's where it kind of gets challenging to change the mindset. And then those teams, they might think like this compliance person that cares about sell, and we are the security team. And that's where that kind of split happens, because they think we have kind of disjointed or like very different objectives. And that's where I find it more difficult, because if you only care about compliance, like the details you said about having like 3 different types of endpoints and how you can manage them, potentially moving everyone to one, so you have one MDM to use and stuff. Like I have one conversation I had with the enterprise security team previous role, and like they were asking for MDM solution, and they wanted the input from the compliance and GRC team. But the answer from the person was, we just want something to manage endpoint. We don't care about anything you pick. We don't And the enterprise security person was trying to show us like all the requirements for the POCs and everything. And I don't care. If you have something that we pass, that's it.
Yeah.
And that person was a bit taken aback because they actually wanted us to provide like proper feedback and like help them design.
Requirements and stuff
And they were a
like
bit
that.
shocked.
Yeah.
They were like, okay, you don't care, that's fine. Then I will ask you again. And then I think they never came back again for questions related to kind of GRC stuff because they were like, those people, they actually don't care. So why bring them in? That was no good look.
You've reminded me of a point actually that's probably worth bringing up, which is like some of these controls can take us a long time to implement. Like even in the early days of companies rolling out an MDM, it could be like a couple-hour job to a couple of months, depending on the complexity and the scale and stuff like that. So something I always love is when GRC teams or sales teams, in some cases, interview customers. They tell us like what they care about. Like, is it SOC 2? Is it data residency? Is it specific country access? That kind of stuff. And let us see that like really early, because I love to function that stuff into my roadmap because it kind of gives me a like, oh, this is what might be coming next. So maybe I should prioritize that because I prefer to be ready than have to like pull my team off of different things and then get them to focus on compliance. So, the less I have to do that, the better.
Yeah, it's like you embed it. It's like shift left, right? You can embed it from the design phase, and then because it's embedded in the way you think about the solution, then you don't have to reach out again. Like you already know where to go, and whatever you'll pick will have those requirements baked in. So yeah, makes a ton of sense. Another topic also related to compliance I wanted to speak to you about is, you're a big zero trust person. Okay. So zero trust has been kind of, we spoke just before, like a little bit about the hype cycle. So everyone was speaking about zero trust and then almost like it dies down. It still happens, but it feels like no one is like speaking about it anymore. AI and agentic and everything else is all the rage. You've been on kind of working on the zero trust side for quite some time in numerous companies, and you started even before kind of major tooling was available to kind of do it. What's your take? Because of course, like there's a lot of interaction between the zero trust side and GRC once again in terms of like the requirements and also providing evidence. How do you see that interacting? What kind of also wins through zero trust you could got or you could get to a GRC and compliance team?
Yeah. So like a big proponent of zero trust is like not doing point in time checks. It's doing continuous validation, which is like the same thing as a lot of GRC engineering, right? It's continuous compliance. And so, I'll pick a dead simple endpoint one where you want to know that all the disks plugged in are encrypted, whether they're external, internal, whatever. Now, like in a traditional setup, you might like have auditors come in and check your MDM and do a point in time check. And that's fine. Like it's okay, but like it's good for compliance. It's not great for security. And so like I said, there's ways that you can bring these together. If you do the continuous compliance where you're like constantly doing checks, you're maybe putting data in your data warehouse or something about it, and you can sort of see maybe control hits, control misses, that kind of thing. Then that's great. You've got that information. You can point the auditors to it. Now, what I still find is that a lot of them are like, great, you've shown us your documentation. You've shown us your controls. Now we're going to go sample check. And a lot of people might be like, it's not a waste of time if you have the continuous compliance. But I don't know. I like to think of it as like outsourcing my testing almost. Like I would still in an ideal world love to test manually everything that I've got. And instead auditors do that for me. Like they do my manual testing. They do the sample testing. If something comes wrong, I'm like, oh no, my control is broken. And of course, ideally, I have automation and testing and stuff to find any problems in advance. But, there's always those edge cases where weird things happen. You didn't consider something, the design phase, something's changed along the way. And so it can almost be good as just like just double check we're doing. And often it saves my team having to do some of that testing. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't personally hate it as long as it's not like super time heavy on my part. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, 100%. Would you say, like, you spoke about kind of when you do more of the kind of continuous monitoring and then you kind of know, for example, for like encrypted disk at all times, like from the whole fleet, how the percentages and like everything that works. Would you say in most cases the GRC team would be able to pull that information live from the feed, where like streaming that data back to somewhere where the GRC team could consume it? Or would you say more often they'll just come to you when audit time's in and then get that population to the list of all the endpoints to give to the auditor app? Because in a sense, I'm thinking there's so many data feeds we could pull from enterprise security. There might be some other concerns in terms of like, potentially increasing the attack surfaces. We have like lots of additional kind of API calls and stuff, but I'm also thinking it might win over time. But how much of that time, related question, how much of that time do you think is like really, really disruptive? Do you think like the audit process as a whole is extremely disruptive to you and your team? Or do you think it's like, yeah, I don't like it too much, but it's not like taking ages and ages?
It can add up. At small companies, you're probably not going to you're not going to sweat it, really. Like, I'll get through our yearly SOC 2 and ISO maybe, and it's maybe a 30-minute meeting each just to go through some sampling, and you're good. You're done. When it tends to get really, really, really time sensitive and complex is when you start doing SOCs, HIPAA, FedRAMP, those three especially, because they tend to be external auditors. They tend to be quite specific in their controls.
Yeah.
And the fines or the problems that occur from not hitting stuff is much greater than if you were to have a finding on your SOC 2, for example, which is like, oh, it's not ideal, but I can resolve it. It's an improvement for next time. I don't think the US government would be super happy if you said that to them for FedRAMP, unfortunately.
Nope.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I think like if you're just like, oh, it's a 30 or 60-minute meeting per each one, when you're getting like 8, an audit cycle might be going for 3 to 4 months, you're dealing with a meeting every other week or every week potentially. It can be like very intrusive. So as much as possible, I want to make dashboards accessible to anyone to save me that time. There's of course cases where we might want to keep it locked down, sometimes for security, sometimes just for like information purposes. Like we lock down our access request history. So like you can't see who has access to what. I think that's pretty common in a lot of places.
Yep.
I do know people who make that public. They don't care who knows who has access to what. It's just information at the end of the day. But it's cases where you kind of want to go through those and find the highest priority ones, the ones that cost you the most time, and then try and like document or publish dashboards for those specific things.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think on our side, of course, speaking about GRC engineering and the whole context, like being able to feed that information, so we can win you back some time and some less context switches throughout the weeks. And as you said, I think not all frameworks are treated the same. I think when you have more of like some protected data, so PCI data or PHI or PII, then in that case, or working with like major public sector, it might be a lot more complex compared to others, like you said, SOC 2 or even ISO is not too bad. So yeah, I get that. It's other countries I know is MAP in Japan or KISMS in South Korea. You can even be fined if you miss the certification. So it can go to great lengths. So for some of these, you have to be a lot more hands-on. So if you can win back time on the other ones where it's kind of very like low touch and the issue often with GRC is the information already exists, and those teams have to, like, you can't just check once a year like for disk encryption. You have to check it continually because it's literally your job. So like it's so easy then for the other teams to leverage it when you can share it, etc., etc. But then in that case, it's like you already did all the hard work, so we just have to pull this stuff out.
I think GRC engineering is obviously a new topic, and it's very common in a lot of internal teams because you're trying to make things easier and save work. But I think in external auditor land, sampling and screenshots are unfortunately going to be here for quite some time to come. And it's not an all or nothing, right? At the end of the day, like they can complement each other.
Yeah, 100%. We're trying to help on the auditor side. We're trying to push them towards a new approach and consuming more machine readable data and stuff. And You'll get to our next question as well. Like I think also sometimes they're scared by a JSON or like some of the more machine readable formats, but if they have a good way to consume them, and then they can almost translate them similar to what an LLM layer could do into something they can understand already, so something more spreadsheety or kind of more screenshot. Then if they can map it back as time goes by, they understand it's just declaring something that you can see in the UI as well. But it might take some time just because of the history of auditing and, stemming from financial audit and all that stuff. So.
Got one last point on this one,
Yeah,
which
go
is
ahead.
we have a custom authorization system here at Canva that we've built internally. So it determines a lot of like the more complex who gets access to what engineering questions in like AWS and stuff. And when we were designing it, and even through the years afterwards, we've kind of talked about what is our backend for storage. And we've always used Jira because it needs to be auditable and it needs to be something that auditors understand. And so rather than using like a proper database,
Interesting.
we do use a proper database, but then we copy everything off to Jira basically. And so that's how the requests are done.
Wow.
Which is like, it's not the most ideal solution, perhaps from an engineering aspect, but it is the most consumable by a general audience.
Wow, that's interesting. So compliance went as far, like auditors went as far as like impacting the whole design of your system.
Yeah.
You need a ticketing layer on top so they can leverage the data. That's, I don't know if I want to be happy or sad. Maybe a bit of both. That's very interesting. Also very related to kind of the experience of end users, this time not auditors. We'll talk more about like the engineers. I would say most engineers, this is a sweeping generalization, probably true. They don't like compliance too much. That's not why they chose their respective jobs. And often like they don't want to like everything that is locking down their kind of endpoint or their ways of working can feel disrupted to them, especially as often engineers that started at one company where it was way smaller, they might have a lot more liberty in how they want to kind of set up their workspace, etc. And as the company grows, and you spoke about stocks, very very good example, like company goes public, everything changes, and in that case you have to lock some stuff down and have some controls in place. So often you can hit some friction around like some of the changes you want to make to people that used to work in a certain way before. And I would say GRC teams, they get that often as well when they reach out for evidence or when they reach out for changes to different systems, etc. So because I think enterprise security teams, they do have to kind of manage those relationships very often, because endpoints is something people are very protective about. It's literally kind of where they work from. It's like the central hub for like their day job. What are some of the good tips you have and experience in terms of making that relationship smoother and also like creating less toil on their end, where they feel like they're helping you, but it doesn't cost them a ton in terms of like time or context switch, etc.
Yeah, you've definitely got to use like I say, a bit of the carrot and the stick. But I do find that just being open and honest and sort of documenting your reasoning as you go is good enough for most people. Like most people will be fine with the decision, assuming that it's well documented and the data is there and it's very clear how you came to the decision that you did. Now, there's always going to be edge cases. I've had some wild scenarios where I'm like, how am I having to explain this to someone? Where and often it's people who are like, yeah, I understand everyone else's devices are insecure, but my personal device is so good that you don't need to worry about it. And it's often those people that are hardest to get across, because you're often like, yeah, I get it. I get you care about this, but like, I need a tool that tells me 100% of people are the same, not that like this one guy, don't worry about him, he's great. So I often do find that, like I say, the more you can improve the user experience, the better it is. So user experience first, improve that. Then document, be open, kind of take people along on the journey, ideally from the early days if possible. I often also like to have a group of, I don't know, very honest people, let's call them, who I go through my spicy changes with
Mm-hmm.
in advance just to see like what are the problems you think I'm going to come across, and I'll kind of put that in my feedback. And then finally is, yeah, you're probably still going to have a few people that complain, and you're going to have to live with it, and you're going to have to know how to deal with those people. They're probably going to be some of the most senior engineers in the company as well, from my experience. So you're either going to need leadership buy-in, or you're going to need something like compliance, where it is like, sorry, like it's got to be done. And so like that's why I often like working with GRC teams, because they help me with the like 0.1%, the stuff I really struggle with.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like when you said that individual that says, no, my machine is like perfect. Like, I had it happen to me once when I was working at a small startup. And what I did is, so we wanted to have an MDM, and we didn't have a security team. So I was working with the IT directly on the MDM implementation. And I remember there was one very senior, it was staff plus engineer, that said, no, my machine, I have everything set up. I have blah, 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 and grok. So he went through the whole stack with me. And I was like, okay. So it was like, you can have everyone else in the MDM, but me, I don't need it. I'll literally like give you like a report every day, whatever, like, from all the monitoring I do. And I was like, the analogy I found, which worked for some reason, is like thinking of your work as a backend dev. Like, would you find some functions where you don't do testing? You're like, this function, I'm so confident in that function, I won't have any unit test anything. I'll just ship it as is, because that one, I wrote it so well. He looked at me, I was like, interesting. Yeah, probably not. Still test. I was like, we still need to test as well.
I really like that. That's I'll have to use that in the future.
Yes, that was like, I was trying to find good. It was before the AI time, so I was like, maybe now AI just asked. But I was like trying to understand better the job, because I was GRC professional in like a very kind of, I think over 60% of the company was engineers at the time. So it was like very engineer heavy, small security startup. And I was like, all the traditional methods of GRC, none of them work. So I have to use new ways. So I was like, just find that stuff. And I was like trying to find something in their job that would make sense to have complete coverage versus like, find a good reason to get out of it. And then we were able to get it, to get the MDM in place. But that's something else I think could be interesting, is like how they interact with your requests. So, for example, you have lots of workflows in enterprise security. You often manage the access requests, especially in bigger companies. It's a big deal. You can have thousands of access requests a month or something. And I do see that often if you have a good experience for them, it can also help. And on that part, how do you think about like building good user experiences for like the more adversarial stakeholders? So the stakeholders where anything comes from your team, they're like, nah. How do you ensure like maybe you use them as design partners? Like, how do you think about building kind of workflows and systems which are like good to use for them, so they are more likely to adhere and not go through shadow means and stuff?
Yeah, like I started my career in the public sector, so doing more government work. And I think government work has like a very stereotypical view of it, which is it's very locked down. You have to go through lots of processes and controls. And often it was to the point where like, oh, I want to run some software, but that port is blocked on my machine. And now I need to go raise a request and wait 2 weeks for someone to approve it. And like, it's just not a great experience. And so I always like to go through the dev processes myself every now and again, even if I'm not like committing code, even if you're just like building a hello world microservice or something. It's worth going through to find out like what actually do other people go through? Because so many like access teams or IT teams and stuff just don't, or like they know it so well that it's just like inherent knowledge to them. Like they know exactly where to go, exactly what to do. So I think like first step is like understand your users, right? Understand what they do, understand their pain. That way you'll hopefully be able to improve it. But of course, there's going to be things, weird edge cases that they find that you don't. And so I think, especially when you're talking about user experience, you're probably not going to be able to make everything perfect. And like we talked a little bit about FedRAMP. I think FedRAMP is a great example where it is so restrictive that you can't apply FedRAMP to like your endpoints or your whole company, right? Like you have to segment them off. You have to keep them away, and you kind of have to say, we know the user experience is bad, I'm sorry, but it's only going to affect these few people who are only working on these few systems with their own devices. For everyone else, you're unaffected. And I think knowing when to do that can be really difficult, because there are ones like HIPAA where there's a few controls in there that are like a bit annoying, especially if you're like a healthcare startup, locking down USB drives and stuff. It's minor stuff, but maybe it's slightly annoying to a brand new company where you're like, oh, do we segment those people off, or do we keep them in and apply it to everyone? And so I think be realistic when you're choosing your controls. Know when to pull something out into its own bubble and when to apply something to everything.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it's like going through their experience is often like super revealing, because you say, as you said, like sometimes you have so much context of your own stuff that you don't really think about all those kind of specific tweaks when you don't have experience. And the first time you use it, you have to kind of start with fresh eyes when you go through some of the stuff you push other people to use. And when you do that, on the compliance and like the GRC side is often the same. Like once you do it from their end, you're like, that's pretty painful. Yeah, if from my end I have so much context, it's literally in my bread and butter. But when someone is like on the HR side and have to do it once, but it takes them ages and have to reach out to 5 people to be able to complete like I don't know, like a risk assessment or something, then if you want adherence and actually get the data you want, you probably should make it a little bit easier for them to do. So that makes a ton of sense.
A lot of people often like, oh, well, we've got the documentation. And one of the fun things can be is try and go through some of your like access request processes without reading any of your documentation, because 60% of your users won't bother.
Yeah,
if you can like build that into the process, you'll provide a better experience overall, is the idea, and you'll hopefully have less of those edge cases.
Yeah, I agree. What is great, I get like what we have is often, because you can do that in Jira. Others, like for access requests, you have kind of a boilerplate template when you create the issue, and it has the documentation inside it. So when you fill it out, you already know like this field is for this, and they have very kind of verbose comments for everything. So you don't have to move to a different page, read that page, which is like the context in a policy, and then go back. And I think having as much embedded directly in the process, so I don't have to leave in change places, is good, because yeah, you can sometimes be a bit lost with other things they're asking and stuff. But yeah, that was very interesting. Another thing I wanted to speak to you about is around kind of SaaS consolidation. Like what's often tough is companies can have hundreds, I want to say thousands, but it can get to thousands of SaaS vendors, and getting good understanding of the whole stack and also like good monitoring and visibility can be a bit challenging. Sometimes you might have to kind of have a core set of tools from the security side that can manage everything. Of course, when we think about enterprise security, I'm thinking EDR, MDM. If you have a solution for kind of networking or something like this, you might have SASE tools. There's different tools as well. How So, in your sense, do you think this versus like maybe lots of different solutions that would be more like specific to one problem? How would you say it's helping on the GRC side? I'm saying that because like there's this like platform versus best of breed. There's always those debates, and like I can have something that is extremely amazing for one thing, but then I also have to monitor all those tools the more I have. But then I might sacrifice some depth if I have something that is a bit more broad. So overall, in your experience, how do you think about those two approaches?
Yeah, I think first step is understand like the vibe of your company. So like when I worked at Shopify, we were very sort of consolidated in our SaaS. I don't think we even had 200 SaaS tools, honestly. And for a company of that size,
Wow.
that's pretty
Wow.
rare. And it was because leadership was very top down in terms of decision making. It was like, if Google do a product for this, we use Google and we don't use anything else.
I've heard that from Shopify. Yeah.
Like you needed to basically prove that it was like 30, 50% better than the Google version of it in order to get it through. And so that was very good from like a risk surface area perspective, because we only had a few tools we needed to secure. We didn't really need any of the SaaS posture management tools because we could pretty much handle it all. But if I tried to do that here, I would probably get very different feedback. And like here we use a few hundred SaaS tools. It's very much open. And I think even our CTO, Brendan, has been very public about this. Like, we give access to like all the AI tools. We give access to OpenAI, Anthropic, whatever you want. We've basically got a license for it. And like, he's been a big proponent of things like spot-based pricing for things like that, where,
Yeah.
We can kind of choose things that fit us and we can have people explore and that kind of thing. And so like both of these are very different examples. And I think you would need different strategies in each. I would probably not here try and do a lot of SaaS consolidation. I'm not going to go to teams and say, for security, you need to stop using that tool that you love. Instead, move to this really secure alternative that is probably terrible. Like, I don't want to be telling teams to use certain tools. Like, I want them to come to me, tell me the tools they want to use, and then be like, make the user experience good. So I can say, like, have you considered this? Some other team is using this other tool. Does that fit your needs? If not, go ahead. Because, I think we in security, we only look at risk surface area and we only care about security. We're not the people having to use the tools on the day to day. And so you got to be measured with it is how I'll end this. Like, you can think about it from a shadow IT perspective, risk, cost, all of the above, none of the above. I think kind of take your company's vibe and you can try pushing it a little bit. And there's definitely been cases here where I've said, maybe we don't use these two tools. Maybe we use one, or we've got two accounts for the same tool over here. Maybe we should just consolidate them. But they're small changes. They're not like huge swathing, let's just use Google for everything examples.
Yeah, it's as you said, it's very company dependent, and I've heard stuff about Shopify being like very kind of Google heavy, and then whatever Google can provide, that they just be the default if they can prove that another tool will be like super better than what Google provides out of the box. Yeah, and that makes sense. Like companies that are a bit more bottoms up in a sense, where it's like more driven by the individuals and what they think is the best for their job. Then in that case, it's more working with them. And as you said, it's always better to almost be kind of just receptive to whatever they share with you instead of trying to push to them something that maybe they already tested and it's not a good fit, and that's why they don't use it. And we also need to think about the business use case for them versus like what fits the security kind of security lens. That maybe this tool like is so much more secure. No, I like this one. It's not secure. This one is great.
At the end of the day, as long as people are paying for the tools, they're going through the procurement process, they're getting them set up securely, I would prefer that than people use shadow IT. I find that a lot of people don't measure how many people move off to those like undeclared systems when they go to the centralized model. So it's always bear that in mind,
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah. Better the devil you know, the devil you don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it 100%. I had another quick question around zero trust, a bit broader than zero trust, but it's more around like so what's some of the frameworks, they might be a bit dated, even the more recent ones, in terms of how they think about certain controls that pertain to enterprise security. And what is tough sometimes is how to convince an auditor that you're satisfying the intent of the control, but how it looks in practice is not how it looks in the standard. So I have a very good friend. He works at Elastic, and he was sharing me some very creative ways he was trying to kind of explain how to integrate security into project management, but applied completely on the security sense using like GitHub PRs as projects. How are some of the ways through which you get the compliance requirement and you get your environment and it doesn't match? How do you combine the two in a sense where you can create that narrative while still not having to have a worse security posture to fit what they're asking for? Like sometimes they might ask for a list of IP address, or they might ask for like an antivirus or random stuff, and you might say, hey, this is not the way it looks right now. It's different times.
I always like it. I always like thinking about the concept of the control as written and the spirit of the control, right? You often hear those two as very separate things. And so the control is written in most frameworks is probably more like a bit dated. I think you need to think like one step lower of like, when they wrote this, what were they trying to achieve? And I find this is actually a lot worse in like cyber insurance than in compliance. I find their questions are 5 years behind complaints in my experience. But yeah, like thinking about it from that realm, you're thinking like, what were they trying to achieve by asking this question? And so like, I can give you a really clear example of one I went through recently, which was passwordless. So like we have a almost entirely passwordless system. We of course have like a master password when you sign up and everything, but after that, you'll probably never use it because we have certificates on our devices and we use those and we rotate them and all of that. And it was surprisingly easy to get it through the auditors because you're basically just saying like password is something you know. We're just replacing that with something you have. We still have the same rotation requirements. We can still revoke it in an incident. Like the spirit of the control, even if it says like passwords must be rotated every 90 days or whatever they decide to do, you can be like, well, actually, no, we've got this, which we think is better. And here's why. And like, if you think about it, that's kind of how we've ended up in this situation. So I think always like, don't be afraid to explain things. Like, don't let your auditors tell you what to do. Like, do push back. But I do think we are in for interesting days with AI, just because the controls are not like well written for this new concept at all.
Yeah.
So something we've been talking about is like access requests, and humans do most of the approvals today, but will humans do most of the approvals in 2, 3, 5 years? Probably not for at least a portion of it, but at least in a lot of the controls, it is written that a human must approve this request. And so, I don't know, that's going to be really interesting. But I think that's going to take some time, or maybe they'll be forced to do it quicker than they'd like.
Yeah, at the rate of speed of change, yeah, maybe you said 3-5 years. Now I think maybe in 6 months, but that's very true. Non-human identities becoming like, they're requesting access themselves and kind of, I'm signing up for this other agent, which is my manager. Very interesting times. I have a couple more questions for you. A question around, of course, your big. Something I think you recently had also a talk, I think with 1Password on it, is around M&A. So it's a topic where you've had a lot of experience. I think it's very challenging. I have indirect experience through M&A, and I would say even thinking with GRC teams is like embedding teams that have like completely different ways of working, and often GRC can be extremely unique in their ways of working, and combining them when they have different requirements and they've been through different types of audits. In your experience, can you give some more of the best practices when working through this that even GRC teams that might have to merge or like combine could learn from? Whatever you can, because I think each one is unique in a sense, but maybe some things you can abstract that you could say work in most cases to make it the best it could.
Yeah, so like I often talk about M&As as principles, not playbooks. And like that is because, like you say, because everyone is different. There's going to be a different strategy for buying that company. There's going to be like acqui-hires, products that you keep, products that you don't. Like there's so many different scenarios that you can potentially go through that it's impossible to document it all. So as long as you have kind of like the principles around it documented, that's fine. So it doesn't hurt to have some principles around how you deal with audits and integration, that kind of stuff. Something I have gone through in the past was a company that got acquired and they were trying to achieve SOC 2. They were like right on the cusp and they used a different tool to what we used. And they were so close and customers had requested it by a certain date that we kind of had to be like, sorry, we're just like going to keep you separate for a while. Like you don't get any access to our stuff. We don't get any access to your stuff. You will continue operating as a separate company for 6 months. You'll go through your SOC 2, you'll get it. And then during the review period, we'll do a big lift and shift of your infrastructure over to ours. And it's really hard. Like I find there's this sweet spot with acquisitions where if the company is too small, they've got no security and it can be a bit of a nightmare. If the company is too big, they've got too much security in a way. They've got like an opinionated team. They've got tooling that might be different. They've got compliance that might be different from your controls. Like maybe you've both got SOC 2, but you're both doing different parts of it. And so like it can be really painful to migrate these things. So like don't feel like you need to do it all in a day. You don't. You can leave these things going. Just approach it from being like, look, if we want to merge products, then we need to think about this. If we're okay to keep things separate for a while, that's fine too. We can secure things in place, and we can kind of improve things there until such a date where we'll kind of fold bits in.
Yeah, I like it. You kind of have to pick your battles as well. But yeah, it's very kind of custom. That's what's the toughest about it. So I combined the two last questions into one. So it's kind of get more of like let's think the future. Okay, let's say AI is not taking over soonish. We have still a couple of years with humans working. How do you see the future, especially of like the relationship between enterprise security and GRC? As you know, this kind of GRC engineering movement is kind of kicking off, where we're trying to kind of self-serve more of that evidence and work more on the technical side. And also, if you can give one or two tips for professionals that want to, on the GRC side, that want to work better with enterprise security, what would be some of the tips you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, if we kind of wrap it up into kind of 3 points, I guess. One would be like get the collaboration going early and work on what the controls you're looking for, and maybe be willing for a bit of give and take, like we were saying earlier. Like maybe there's a few controls I might ask you to add, or a few things that I might generally be like, it's also for compliance. It might not be, but it's like something in the same vein, or it's just easier to get it all done at once. I think 2 is, like I say, I don't want to be spending weeks and weeks and weeks of my time in audit meetings. So the more we can do continuous compliance, the more we can bring that out into a point where auditors can ideally self-serve, even if it's just you being like, look, here are the top controls that we need to go through. Here are the most painful ones. Can you document those for me in advance? That's great. Like being able to know that stuff obviously helps a ton. And like I just say, I think that the real benefit, I think, is getting through those sort of difficult 0.1% of fixes. Having sort of the compliance stick to beat people with. I know that's not a very sort of nice concept, but like if you've done everything else and you've improved things, you've used the carrot, you've like really improved things, you've got a few last stragglers, sometimes they can be really helpful to just help deal with. You know, we can be like, sorry, we're doing this for compliance. Go talk to the compliance team. They can verify that with you, you know. But I think that's pretty much it. Like those are the big 3 from me. I do find that we're probably in for interesting days, especially around, like you say, a lot of automation, a lot of AI access, and maybe even AI doing the reviews for some of that stuff. I think I'm probably going to get pressured from my leadership to start doing more of this stuff, to start showing more of the benefits. And I find that the problem I'm going to come up across in the next couple of years is that the controls, they just don't match. And so I think helping us navigate that will be quite helpful, because I think there's some things I always want a human to do, and there's some things where I'm a little bit more flexible, but maybe the controls don't allow it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think the 3 tips were, I think, super useful for GRC practitioners. I do see that, you know, they're like, we need to reduce toil and kind of focus more on like being partner versus just having a more of a give take relationship. So, you know, I need this, give me this, and then see you in 6 months. That probably won't scale and won't make you friends, which is also important. I think when you have a good relationship, then you can get what you want when you need it, because there's trust. And like, on the other hand, when you need our help, we can help you as well. So I think coffee chats, you know, like some regular human stuff can also help in terms of like building those good relationships on which then you can base collaboration. I think sometimes we see it as almost like, you know, we there's this tick of like all those control owners, we need to reach out, this one, this one, this one. And I completed my list, can go have an early weekend or something. I think it's more about long-term design partners, and then you can get more out of the relationship. That was very cool. I think we spoke about quite a few topics that were super interesting, even for me. Learned a ton, especially I'm thinking about GRC engineering, how we'll change this kind of relationship going forward. And I do really see like the nuances as well in terms of some of the stuff where, you know, like helping you spend less time is useful, but there's so many other kind of facets to the relationship that isn't just related to like evidence collection. And I think, especially you spoke about AI, there's so many opportunities now to kind of think more about how those AI related controls work. We have new frameworks coming in to kind of help us with that, but I think a lot of them are still fairly high level. and more around like kind of governance of the process versus more detailed, like, if I use an AI code assistant, what would be the controls? If I use, generation of images, what would be the controls, etc. That was
Don't
great.
connect
Any
AI to prod and
Yeah,
basic
probably. Hey,
things like
vibe
that.
code. You're going to have tough times now because even GRC teams now they're vibe coding. So now you're going to get GRC people just pushing remediations to prod. So that's the next step up with
Hey,
vibe coding. I think everyone is entitled to ship code to production.
yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of opportunity, right? At the end of the day, like in the past, I found that building continuous compliance monitoring is massive. Like it's huge. If you want to do like things at scale with your customer data, like getting the data from every single request anyone is making is massive. So I think there's going to be interesting times to help save a lot of that work, especially with new privacy and oversight on a lot of that data.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that'll be fun. But yeah, I think that we're more data engineering skills, different type of skill set we'll need for those new times. Any last point you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it. It's been great to be here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Where people can reach out to you if they want to kind of catch up with you or kind of ask follow-up questions if they have.
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so people can always reach out there. I'm always happy to talk about GRC and enterprise security stuff.
Amazing. Sounds good. That was amazing to have you here. Great conversation. Enjoyed it. So now I'm starting my day officially. That's a great way to start my week, actually. Really, my brain is all fired up. I'm ready to get rolling now. So yeah, thanks a lot for the time.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Take care.